The ships did not come with fire. They came with silence. One moment the sky was blue. The next, it was full of gray metal, so much of it that the clouds split apart just from the weight of the shadows. People in the streets stopped walking. Cars stopped moving. A child dropped an ice cream cone, and nobody told her it was okay. Everyone just looked up. Nora Dale did not look up for long. She looked up once, counted 11 ships in the formation above the city, noted the spacing between them, and then looked back down at her notebook. Her pencil moved across the page. She drew the formation as she had seen it. The distances were not perfect, but they were close. Close enough. She was sitting on a low wall outside a community shelter on the east side of the city. Around her, people were crying, shouting into phones, pulling children close. A man near her was screaming at the sky. Nora could not hear him. She could not hear any of them. She had been deaf since the day she was born, and the world had always been a quiet place to her. Right now, that felt less like a limitation and more like a small, private advantage. She watched the ships instead of fearing them. Within the first hour, smaller craft came down. They landed in open spaces, parks, stadiums, wide roads. Soldiers came out. They were tall. Their armor was dark and smooth, and their faces were covered by visors that caught the light and turned it gray. They moved in clean, practice lines. Nora watched them and thought, they have done this before. Many times. This is not new to them. The Verikai, the news feeds had called them, in the weeks of warnings before the actual arrival. Not that the warnings had helped anyone. Why the second hour? The soldiers were directing people. Not hurting them. Not yet, just moving them. Sorting them. Lines formed. Nora joined a line because it was the path of least resistance, and she wanted to stay close to the command post they were setting up near the old City Hall building. She counted windows. She noted which doors had guards and which did not. She was good at noticing things. She had always been good at noticing things. When you cannot hear, you watch. You watch faces, hands, posture, timing, habit. You learn to read the world through what it shows instead of what it says. Most people moved through life listening. Nora moved through it seeing. The line brought her to a scanner. It was a tall piece of Verikai equipment, blue lit and humming. A soldier gestured for each person to stand in front of it. The machine would do something, scan something, and a number or a mark would appear on a small screen. Nora watched the people ahead of her. Some were pulled to one side. Most were waved through. When her turn came, she stood still. The light passed over her slowly. The screen showed the result. A Verikai officer glanced at it. His body language said, nothing. Not a threat. Not interesting. He waved her through. She caught a glimpse of the screen as she passed at IT read. Zero threat. She almost smiled. She was moved with the group to an indoor processing area inside the old community sports hall. Long tables had been set up. More soldiers. More scanning. Names were written on tags in both human letters and Verikai script. People were assigned numbers. A soldier approached Nora and spoke to her. She pointed to her ears and shook her head. He wrote something on a tag and handed it to her. She put it on. She read the Verikai script on it carefully. She could not yet speak their language, but she had spent the last 3 weeks learning to read it from signal fragments the Resistance had intercepted and shared online. The tag said, nonverbal. Labor Group 4. Low supervision. Low supervision. She kept her face neutral and sat down on a bench when the soldier pointed at one dot from that bench. She had a clear view of the main doors, 3 guard positions, a cable channel running along the east wall that she guessed carried power to the scanner equipment, and a side corridor that led, based on the exterior layout she had memorized, toward the back entrance of the command post. She opened her notebook and began to draw. Not quickly. Not with any urgency. She drew the way someone might sketch out of boredom, the way people doodle when they are waiting. A soldier passed by, glanced at her notebook, and kept walking. He saw a quiet girl drawing shapes. He saw nothing by the time the processing was done. She had a full layout of the interior guard positions, the scanner equipment, the power routing, and 2 access points that were not being watched. She also had the timing of the guard rotations, measured by watching shadows and the movement of soldiers over a 90-minute window. She tore the page out carefully, folded it small, and slid it into the inner lining of her jacket sleeve. Her brother Sully had been 2 blocks away when the ships landed. She had not seen him since. She did not let herself think about that yet. Thinking about it would not help. Finding out where he was taken would help. Understanding how this place worked would help point one thing at a time. Outside, through the high windows of the sport hall, the sky had gone gray with the underside of the fleet. Most people in the room were sitting with their heads down, scared and small. Nora sat with her back straight and her eyes moving. She had already started. 3 days into the occupation, Nora was assigned to a sorting facility that IT was a large warehouse near the edge of the processing zone where the Verikai stored everything they had taken from humans during the collection sweeps. Clothing, tools, electronics, personal items. The aliens did not seem to want most of it. They were cataloging it, building a picture of who humans were and what they used. Understanding the species they had just conquered, Nora understood the logic. She did the same thing herself, just in the opposite direction. She worked quietly, moving crates, scanning tags, stacking items on shelves. The other workers talked to each other in low voices. Nora watched their mouths when she needed to know something and looked away when she did not. The Verikai soldiers who monitored the facility walked a set route. 4 guards. Rotation every 40 minutes. 2 blind spots near the back shelving units. She had mapped all of it by the end of her first shift out on the second day. She started making small changes. Point 1 supply crate bound for the command post got its contents tag swapped with a crate holding non-essential items. Nothing dramatic, just a swap. It would not stop anything. It would slow something down. It would make someone, somewhere, spend time fixing a small problem that should not have existed. A power cell mark for a scanner unit was logged in the wrong column in the inventory record. A single digit changed. Again, not large. Just a thread pulled slightly loose. She did not rush. She did not try to break anything. She was not building a fire. She was building a leak. Slow, small, invisible. On the 3rd day of her assignment, a Verikai scientist came into the facility. He was not a soldier. He moved differently, slower, more curious. He carried a data tablet and stopped to observe workers rather than direct them. His armor was lighter, gray-green instead of black. Nora noticed the symbol on his shoulder, a circle with a line through it. She had seen that symbol in intercepted transmissions. It marked the science division. He stopped near her and made a note on his tablet. She kept working. He watched for a while, then moved on. Later he came back. He held up a small scanning device and gestured, asking permission. Nora looked at the device, then at him, then nodded. He ran the scanner over her slowly, the same way the entry scanner had, but with more passes and more adjustments. He was thorough. While he looked at his readings, Nora looked at his tablet screen. He had left it angled just enough. The text was in Verikai. She read what she could in the seconds available. His name was Fenrast. He was a xenobiologist. His current study was listed as behavioral analysis of the human nonverbal subset. That meant her. She looked away before he looked up. He made a few more notes, gave her a short, professional nod, and left. That night, Nora was in her assigned sleeping area, a cordoned section of the sport hall with cots and a single light. When the others were asleep, she sat up and worked. She had been collecting small pieces of wire from the facility over the past 3 days. Signal wire, thin and coated, the kind used in Verikai communication equipment. She had taken no more than a hand length at a time. Nothing that would be noticed as missing. She laid the pieces out on her blanket and began to connect them by touch, working with small tools she had found in a confiscated toolkit that had passed through her hands during sorting. The people around her slept. She worked. The device she was building was a signal interceptor. She had designed it in her head from pieces of knowledge gathered over months before the invasion. She had been part of an online group of engineers and hobbyists who studied alien signal theory after the first confirmed contact years ago. She had never told anyone she was part of that group. There had been no reason to. There was a reason now. The next morning, her brother's name appeared on a printed list posted near the sorting facility entrance. It was a prisoner transfer list. She read it twice. Sully Dale, classified, resistance organizer, scheduled for processing aboard the primary command ship. She stood in front of that list for no longer than 3 seconds, then walked to her station and began her shift. Her face showed nothing. Her hands were steady. But that evening, Gort, the guard assigned to her section, filed a short report. It noted that the silent human worker in labor group 4 seemed unusually unbothered by conditions in the facility. Unlike the others, she never showed signs of distress. He was not sure what to make of it. He suggested she be monitored more closely. Commander Drev read the report that night and marked it low priority. She cannot even speak, he said to his aide. What could she possibly do? He moved on to other reports. Nora, 3 buildings away, connected the last wire in her signal interceptor and tested it against a Verikai frequency she had memorized from the facility's communication unit. The IT worked. On the 9th day, Commander Drev decided he wanted to see the silent girl himself. He had reasons that were not entirely logical, which annoyed him. Gort's report had been nothing. A guard with too much imagination. But something about the note, the specific word unbothered, had stayed with him. The Verikai had occupied 14 worlds. In every case, the subjugated population followed a pattern. Fear, resistance, submission, adaptation. It was reliable, almost biological. The humans here were in the submission phase. They showed fear in their faces and their posture and their voices. That was normal, expected. It confirmed the pattern. Gort had said this one did not fit the pattern. That was the part Drev could not leave alone. She was brought to him in a side room near the command post. She was small, her clothing was plain, and she carried a worn notebook tucked under one arm. She stood in front of him and looked at him with flat, steady eyes that he spoke to her. She did not react. He spoke louder. Nothing. He turned to his aide. Confirm nonverbal. Confirmed. Deaf from birth. No asistiva de visis. Drev looked back at her. She was looking at him the same way she had been looking at him since she walked in. Not defiant. Not afraid. Just watching. He had the odd feeling that she was the one conducting the evaluation. He dismissed her after 4 minutes. There was nothing there. Nora walked back to the sorting facility and began her shift. She had spent the 4 minutes in that room reading Drev's lips as best she could. His language was not fully clear to her yet, but she had caught several key words. One of them was a timing reference she had encountered before in intercepted transmissions. It referred to a departure window. She needed to cross-reference it. She spent the morning working and thinking, and by midday, she had the context she needed from a transmission fragment her interceptor had caught the night before. Suli's transfer had been moved up. He would be taken off-planet in 72 hours instead of the original week-long window she had been planning around. Her timeline had just been cut to a third. She did not stop working. She did not react. She thought through every step she had already taken and every step she had not taken yet, and she began to adjust. That afternoon, Ambassador Lyra arrived at the occupation zone. Nora watched from across the processing courtyard as the ambassador's small convoy came through the checkpoint. Lyra was a composed woman with gray in her hair and a careful way of moving that said she had been in difficult rooms before and intended to walk out of all of them. She was there to negotiate, to talk. Nora respected that. Talking was a tool. Lyra was using the tool she had. Nora was using different tools. As Lyra's group passed through the facility area on their way to the command post, Nora was positioned near the access corridor. She had placed herself there with purpose. As Lyra walked by, Nora stepped slightly into her path. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough for a half-second of contact. In that half-second, Nora pressed a folded piece of paper into Lyra's hand. Lyra did not stop. She was good. She closed her hand around the paper without changing her stride and kept walking. On the paper was a timing grid. 3 sets of numbers. Ship positions based on what Nora had pulled from her interceptor. A patrol rotation window. And at the bottom, 6 words in plain block letters. Use these. Do not ask how. That evening, Fenraz came back to the sorting facility. He was not there for an official observation this time. He came in quietly on the edge of the shift change and found Nora near the back shelving units. He held his tablet to his chest. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned his tablet around so she could see the screen he had written in both Verikai script and in slow, careful letters in English that I know what you built. I saw the frequency log. He watched her face. She looked at the words. Then she looked at him. Then she reached in her notebook tore out a small strip of paper, and wrote one word on it. She held it up. Please. Fenraz stood there for a long time. He was a scientist. He studied living things. He'd spent his career learning what creatures did when they were afraid and what they did when they were not. He had never, in all his work, seen anything quite like this. He took the strip of paper from her. He put it in his chest pocket. He left without filing a report. Nora watched him go, then went back to her interceptor that night and pulled every transmission she could in the hours before sleep. 72 hours had become 61. She worked faster. The warehouse was cold before dawn. Nora had been awake for most of the night, sitting cross-legged on her cot with the interceptor resting on her blanket and her notebook open across her knees. The other workers breathed and shifted around her. Someone near the wall snored. She worked through it all, catching signal fragments, reading what she could, piecing together the parts she could not read from the parts she could. She found the docking code for the prisoner transfer around the third hour before sunrise. It was a clearance sequence, 6 digits, used to confirm transfer authorization between the ground post and the command ship overhead. Without it, a transfer could not be logged as complete. The ship would not accept the prisoners. She had a second thing she needed: the maintenance frequency for the docking bay channel. She found that 2 an hour before the facility woke up, she used her interceptor to push a single signal up on the maintenance frequency. It carried a modified version of the clearance code, not a fake one, a real one with 1 digit shifted, which would cause the docking system to flag the authorization as pending verification. Nothing dramatic. No alarm. Just a small automated hold. Standard procedure in the Verikai system she had studied was to run a verification check before clearing the hold. That check took between 6 and 12 hours, depending on how busy the command ship was. She had just bought herself half a day. She folded the interceptor into the hidden seam inside her mattress and lay down for 2 hours before the facility lights came on. At first shift, she kept her head down and moved crates. Gort was on duty. He watched her more than usual. She could feel it without looking. She had been prepared for this moment. She did not behave differently. She did not avoid him or adjust her route. She simply worked. Midway through the shift, she moved through the section near the restricted corridor that led toward the equipment storage for the command post. She was not supposed to be there. She had timed it for the window between Gort's position and the next guard post. 40 seconds. She used 30 of them. In the restricted corridor, inside a secondary supply cabinet she had opened on her second day, with a key she had copied by pressing it briefly against the wax-coated inner cover of her notebook. She had stored 3 things over the past week. A piece of Verikai communication hardware taken from crates she had mislabeled. A hand-drawn map of the command ship's internal layout, assembled from fragments of different intercepted transmissions over 7 days. And a letter. She took the letter out now and folded it into her sleeve. Then she relocked the cabinet and returned to her section. Gort was standing near her station when she came back. He looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching. He stepped closer. He spoke. She pointed at her ears. He knew she was deaf, but she could read that he was frustrated. He pulled out a small writing pad that soldiers use for processing notes and wrote 2 words. Where were you? She reached in her notebook and tore a page out calmly. She wrote back. She handed him the page. He read it. His expression shifted. He turned the page over. He looked back up at her. What she had written was not an explanation of where she had been. It was a diagram. His own quarters on the post. A specific corner of the ceiling near the air vent. And one short sentence beneath it. They're watching you too. He stood there for a long time. Long enough that she thought he might call it in any way. Then he folded the page once, put it in his pocket, and walked away from her station without a word. She went back to work. That afternoon, she passed close to the edge of the courtyard where Ambassador Lear's negotiation session was being held in an open-sided tent structure. She could not hear the conversation. She watched the body language. Lear was talking. Drev was listening with the posture of someone who had already decided how the conversation was going to end. But then Lear said something that made Drev stop. His body shifted. He leaned forward slightly. 2 of his aides exchanged a look. Nora had told Lyra to use the ship positions in the negotiations. Lyra had, and whatever she had said with those coordinates had just made the Verikai command feel something they had not expected to feel today. Uncertain. That evening, Drev ordered a full sweep of all facility sections. He gave no reason for the order. He did not need to give one. Nora was in the sleeping area when the soldiers started searching. She sat on her cot and watched them move through the space, opening bags, checking mattresses, pulling back shelving. Her interceptor was in the hidden seam. Her notebook was in her lap. The cabinet in the restricted corridor was locked. There was nothing else to find out. A soldier stopped at her cot. He looked at her notebook. She held it up with both hands, open to a random page. He saw shapes, lines, some drawings that looked like building layouts, which they were, but which he had no frame for. He handed it back, moved on. They found nothing. Nora put her notebook back on her knee and kept her breathing. Even though 61 hours had become 40, she was ready to move. The command ship was not supposed to be reachable. The IT sat in low orbit, visible in the sky as a dark shape that blotted out a strip of stars. Supply runs went up on scheduled lifts. Prisoner transfers went up on coded clearances. Civilian access did not exist. The Verikai had not built a way in for the people they were occupying because it had never occurred to them that one would be needed. Fenrast had a standing authorization to move biological specimens between the ground post and the ship. He used it once a week. Nobody checked his containers carefully because he was Science Division and his cargo was technically classified. On the 40th hour before Suli's rescheduled transfer, Fenrast submitted a specimen transfer request for one nonverbal human subject. Passive classification, required aboard ship for continued behavioral study. He listed the authorization code that matched his standing clearance. The request was approved in 11 minutes. Nora was in a sample container the size of a large storage trunk, with a slow air supply and a reading light barely brighter than a match. She had the map of the command ship's interior folded in her jacket. She had her interceptor. She had her notebook and pencil. She was not afraid. She was thinking. The lift ride was 40 minutes. She counted them by measuring her breathing. When the container was set down and the hatch opened, Fenrast was standing over her with an expression that said he still was not sure he had made the right choice. She climbed out, stood up straight, and looked at him. He pointed left. Then he held up 4 fingers. For corridors down. He mimed a door with bars, detention level. She nodded. She pointed at him and raised her eyebrows. He understood the question. He pointed at himself and then at the floor. He would stay there. He would not come with her. But he would not report the container as empty when it was supposed to still have a subject inside. That bought her time. She moved. The ship was huge and identical in every corridor, which was a problem for most people. Nora had the map. She had spent 7 days building it from fragments, and she had checked every intersection she could confirm from transmission data. She moved quickly and with purpose because the fastest way to look like you belonged somewhere was to walk like you already knew where you were going. She found the detention level in 9 minutes. The cells were behind a heavy panel door that required a key code. She did not have a code. She had spent no time trying to get the code because she had not needed it. 3 days ago, her interceptor had caught a maintenance transmission that included a default reset sequence used when guards lost their individual codes. She had kept it. She entered it now. The door opened. She moved through the cells quickly, looking at faces. Most of the humans inside were awake. Some stood. 1 or 2 started to speak. She held a finger to her lips and kept moving. Suli was in the 4th cell, but he looked worse than she had expected. Tired, with healing cuts on his jaw and hands. When he saw her through the cell panel, his face went through 5 different things in 2 seconds. She watched all of them. Then he settled on something that looked like controlled relief and pressed his hand flat against the panel. She pressed hers against the other side. Then she stepped back, entered the maintenance sequence again on his cell lock, and the panel slid open. He stepped out. He reached for her. She stepped back once, looked at him firmly, and signed. Not yet. Follow me. Quiet. He followed. She did not take him out the same way she had come in. She took him toward the communication relay room on the level above, which she had marked on her map 3 days ago when an intercepted maintenance log had mentioned a routine calibration in that section. The room would be unstaffed during the current rotation window. She had 15 minutes inside it. At most, the relay room was unlocked. She went in. The equipment was larger than she had imagined it from the transmission data. but the layout matched. She found the outgoing signal array in under 2 minutes. She pulled out her interceptor and connected it to the array using an adapter she had built specifically for this. Using hardware taken from the sorting facility over 2 weeks, she uploaded everything. Every transmission she had intercepted. Every signal fragment, decoded patrol schedule, fleet position, command code, and rotation window she had assembled over 3 weeks of careful, invisible work. Addressed to every resistance contact identifier she had pulled from the facility logistics system. 7 nodes, 3 continents. The upload took 4 minutes. When it was done, she disconnected the interceptor and tucked it into her jacket. Alarms had not sounded yet, but she could feel the vibration in the floor change. Something, somewhere in the ship, had noticed an unauthorized access point. She and Sully moved for the exit corridor. To the intersection between the relay level and the maintenance corridor, Gort was standing with 2 other soldiers that he saw her. The 2 soldiers with him started to move forward. Gort said something to them. They stopped. Gort looked at Nora for a long moment. His face was unreadable that he stepped to the side of the corridor. She walked past him with Sully close behind her. She did not look back. 2 corridors further on, she found the emergency evacuation pod bay that she had marked on her map. She had not been sure it would be unlocked. It was. She pulled Sully inside and sealed the hatch behind them. 12 seconds later, Commander Drev entered the relay room and saw the access point. He stood very still. Then he walked to the detention level himself. He looked at the open cell. He looked at the panel door. He thought about what this meant, what it took to plan something like this on a Verikai command ship by a human who had been scanned as 0 threat on day 1. He went back to the entry records and pulled up her processing file. He read it for a long time. Then he went to find her. The evacuation pod hit the atmosphere hard. IT was not built for human bodies, and the harnesses were too wide, so Nora and Sully held onto the crossbars and each other while the pod burned its way down through the clouds. She could not hear the reentry, but she felt it in her teeth, in her chest, and the flat of her hands. Sully had his eyes closed. She kept hers open. They landed in a field outside the eastern city boundary. The pod cracked on impact and split along one side. They climbed out into cold morning air and stood in wet grass with smoke rising from the pod behind them. Sully put his hands on her shoulders and looked at her face. She looked back at him. He was trying to say something. She watched his mouth. He was saying, "How?" She held up her notebook that he laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh that happens when you have been scared for a very long time and the fear suddenly has nowhere to go. They walked east. By the time human resistance fighters found them 40 minutes later, 3 things were already happening in the northern city zone. The resistance cell that had been dark for 9 days came back online. They had received Nora's data burst. They had fleet positions, command codes, patrol windows, and rotation schedules. They were moving in the southern zone. A second cell had used the intercepted Verikai frequencies to begin broadcasting false patrol confirmations, creating gaps in the occupation grid that had not existed before. Verikai soldiers who showed up at their assigned positions found nothing, and soldiers who stayed in place received orders to move. The occupation, which had been clean and controlled, was beginning to tangle. Aboard the command ship, Commander Drev had gone to the relay room and seen the access logs. Then he had gone to the evacuation bay. Then he had returned to his command chair and sat in it for a long time without speaking. His aide eventually reported that unauthorized transmissions had gone out on the outgoing array. Content: unknown. Recipients: multiple ground-side nodes. Drev told his aide to begin a full communications lockdown, which was the correct response and which was also several hours too late. He pulled up the original entry scan from day 1. The screen still read, 0 threat. He stared at it. When the resistance fighters found Nora and Sully in the field, one of them, a young man with mud on his boots and a rifle slung on his back, looked at Nora and then looked at Sully with a question in his eyes. Sully understood. He said, "Yes, she's the one." The fighter looked back at Nora. She was standing in the wet grass with her notebook under her arm and her jacket still damp from the pod landing. She looked like someone who had not slept in 2 days, which was accurate. She also looked completely calm. He did not know what he had expected. Something bigger, maybe someone louder. That he nodded at her. She nodded back. Then she opened her notebook to a new page and began writing, because there were still things that needed to be communicated, still steps that needed to happen, and standing in a field was only useful if you were doing something with the time. She wrote a list of the 7 resistance contacts she had sent the data burst to, with notes on each one about what kind of information they had received and how they could best use it. She tore the page out and handed it to the fighter. That he read it. Then he got on his radio. Ambassador Lyra received word of the data burst 3 hours later, while she was in her 4th session with Drev's negotiation team. She had spent those 4 sessions doing exactly what Nora had predicted, using the coordinates and fleet position from the folded note to push the Verikai into a position where they had to defend information they did not know had been compromised. Now she had the full picture. She had fleet positions, rotation codes, and command access sequences. She had what the Verikai thought only the Verikai had. She placed the report on the table in front of Drev's lead negotiator and let it sit there. The negotiator read it. Then he looked up at her. For the first time in 4 sessions, the body language on the other side of the table was not casual. Lyra folded her hands and waited. Drev came down from the command ship that evening. That he met with Lyra personally, which had not been offered before. He walked into the room and sat across from her and looked at the report on the table between them. Then he looked at Lyra. He said, "The silent girl." It was not a question. Lyra said nothing. He said, "I want to see her." Lyra said that was not possible. That he sat for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me what she wants." That was the first real negotiation they had. Gort filed his personal account 2 weeks later, after the withdrawal talks had begun in earnest. It was translated by a Verikai linguist who had defected during the confusion following the data burst. Van Rast had submitted it to the Science Division as part of his behavioral analysis report, which was the most unusual document in the history of Verikai occupation records. The account read, in part, "We scanned for weapons. We scanned for aggression. We scanned for the things we understood as dangerous. We did not scan for patience. We did not scan for someone who watched and listened and waited. We built our occupation on what humans feared. We did not ask what one human, who felt no need to perform fear, might do instead." Nora read the translated version on a clean morning 3 weeks after the field. She was sitting on the same low wall outside the community shelter where she had sat on the first day, watching the gray ships overhead. The ships were fewer now, moving in a different pattern. Slowly, in the weeks to come, they would continue to thin until the sky was its own color again. She opened her notebook to a clean page. She started to draw.